Good morning, and welcome to the latest edition of the TCR Dialogues. I am your host, Chuck Hobbs. Now, many of you, if you read the news, you are aware that across America, particularly over the last 10 years, it has been here longer than that, but definitely over the last 10 years, there has been a huge push for reparations here in the United States of America, both with regards to slavery, as well as many of the pernicious acts that took place during Jim Crow. Many of you also, if you watch popular television, probably have seen instances of massacres that took place in the 20th century. The Tulsa Massacre in 1921 was shown prominently on HBO's Lovecraft Country, as well as its hit show, The Watchmen. Likewise, a lot of people have learned more because, as we talk about a lot, many of the worst aspects of American history when it comes to Black people often are not taught in popular history courses. But as the years go by, more and more, as we're starting to celebrate centennials of these instances, you're starting to see more information getting out into the public. So today we have an excellent guest to talk about just that. Me being a Florida boy, having grown up here and been born here in the state of Florida, it is so important to the world for us to continue to commemorate what happened down in Rosewood, Florida during the first week of January of 1923. And I have no one better to talk about it today than Miss Ebony Pickett, who I'd like to bring to the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I always start this segment off by asking, once you're introduced, to also talk about your connection to the AME Church. What is your church? Who is your pastor? And what has your faith meant to you throughout your life?
All right. Well, good morning. As he said, my name is Ebony Pickett, and I am a member of New Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Lacoochee, Florida. My pastor is Reverend Aquanette Kim Harrison, and I am a lifelong AME, born and raised in the church. I am in the 11th Episcopal District. Bishop Adam J. Richardson is my bishop. My connection to the AME Church, currently I am on the steward board as well as I am the YPD director. I have been the YPD director now maybe about 10 years. I also work with other youth in the community and the church. I'm the choir director. I'm over all the youth programs. So I'm pretty connected to the AME Church.
Absolutely. And I bring greetings as well from the 11th District. I am a member of Bethel AME Church under the leadership of Reverend Julius McAllister, and Bishop Richardson is also my bishop and also a very dear mentor and family friend. Now, you also, like Bishop Richardson and yours truly, are a FAMU Rattler.
This is true.
Absolutely. How important was your matriculation through FAMU during the 90s, particularly during a time when the Rosewood Massacre actually started to gain more prominence here in our state as well across the nation?
Well, actually, yes, I am a Florida Rattler. I'm in a FAMU Rattler. I am a 1998 graduate. I have my Bachelor of Science in Occupational Therapy from Allied Health Sciences. Yes, it was very important, my connection with the Rosewood family during that time, because as you know, that's when the bill was passed. It was in 1994. I attended FAMU from 1992 to 1998. So during that time, I really understood the importance of voting. My family has always been very civic. My grandmother, she volunteered at the poll. We even had a voting precinct in Rosewood in 1920. So even going back to the 20s, we were always very in tune with our civic duties. It was very important for me to attend Florida A&M University because, number one, I am an African-American woman from a very small town, Lacoochee, Florida. We don't really see a lot in Lacoochee, but my parents always instilled in me interest for higher education. My grandmother, Altamise Rispes, she attended FAMU. It was FAMU College at that time. My mom is also a graduate, as well as my other two sisters. So it was very important for my matriculation at FAMU because I felt like I was a part of history. I was learning more about myself. During this time when the bill was passed, I was able to go to the legislature. I was there on the Capitol steps when the Rosewood bill was actually passed. So it was very phenomenal because I was able to share my past for the first time and feel proud about my past. I didn't have to hide who I was or be ashamed or embarrassed about where we had come, because it was seeming to be that we were accomplishing so much by sharing our story with the world.
Absolutely. And in regards to that past, the more recent past, which is the 1990s, when the legislature here in Florida began to consider a claims bill to try to compensate the survivors of the Rosewood Massacre, and more importantly, the old history from the 1920s. I'd like for you to discuss with our viewers today a little bit about what your family's connection was to Rosewood and what oral history has been passed down to you through the years.
Well, my connection to the Rosewood family is I'm from the branch of the Evans, as well as Edwards and Carriers. If you've done any history reading or researching about Rosewood, you would know that it was a very close-knit community, and we were mostly related by either blood or marriage. There were a few people that weren't actually related, but the majority of us are. So I am a Evans. I am the great granddaughter of Josephine E. Lewis. Her name was Josephine E. Evans Lewis before she married. And this lady right here was so phenomenal. She was raised in Rosewood. She left after the massacre, but she instilled those same traits that they had in Rosewood. She brought them to Lacoochee, and everyone called her Mama Joe. She kept the cleanest house, the highest raised bed. She could cook the best cornbread and biscuits. She took care of everybody in the community. Once we had to name the Women's Missionary Society our local branch, it was no one better to name it after besides my great grandmother, which was Josephine E. Lewis.
Absolutely. And also you have a connection, a relation to Mr. Willie Evans, if I'm not mistaken, as well, right?
That's correct. Mr. Willie Evans, which is my uncle, that was my great grandmother's little brother, Willie Evans. Willie Evans actually was one of the Rosewood survivors. He even testified in front of the legislature. He was one of the ones that received the reparations, $150,000. And once he got a little older, he finished his life in Lacoochee, living with my grandmother, Altamise Rispas, and her sister, Annie Bell Lee, which was the lady that actually started the Rosewood Family Reunion. And that's mine.
Did you ever get a chance to talk to him at length at all about what his recollection might be from that period of time?
Almost definitely. One great thing, one thing that they're showing us right now, when I was looking for some things, I happened to find one of our Rosewood Family Reunions from 1992. And we were in Tougaloo, Mississippi. At that time, my cousin Annette Shakur, which her father also was a direct descendant, her husband was the president of Tougaloo College. So that's why we attended that reunion there. And we also stayed on the campus. We went to the president's house. But we were actually, what one great thing about the Rosewood reunions were, even before we began to tell our story publicly, we would always share it at the family reunions. It was something that we were told by our cousin Philomena Goins' doctor that we didn't share outside because we didn't want anyone to know the atrocities that had happened to our family. And a lot of the family members were still afraid. So when the reunions actually began in 1985, planning meetings in 84, that was one of the big things. They always shared. We always had a moment that the people would get together, the survivors at that time. It was cousin Lee Ruth Bradley. It was my uncle Willie. It was cousin Philomena. It was cousin Dorothy Halsey, cousin A.T. Goins. It was probably about 11 to 13 of them back in the 80s that were still living. So they would sit there and they would tell us the story of how it was to live in Rosewood before the massacre and how beautiful it was and how it was considered the Florida's Black Mecca. And there were so many fruit trees and beautiful rose trees. They would tell us just it was the best place to grow up as a child. And then the massacre happened in 1923. And you could see our family members at that time, they were in their 70s. They would just begin to weep and cry and console each other. And, at first I really couldn't understand, why are we still crying about something that happened so long ago? But, I was 10 or 11 at the time. But as I grew older and I really understood exactly what the struggle was all about, exactly, how our entire town was erased and people were hung and killed. it kind of opened my eyes, and it helped me to really understand really what our plight was.
Absolutely. And I'd like to welcome all of our viewers. And again, if you are a member of the AME Church, please place in the comment section your name. Well, your name obviously will pop up, but place your church as well as your district into the comment section. Continuing on, Ebony, let me ask you this, let me state this. Before we came on air today, you and I talked a little bit about my own family history. My grandmother, Arilla Jones, was born not very far from Rosewood, one county over, as a matter of fact, in Dixie County, in a small town called Shamrock on April 22nd of 1923. So she was born about 3 months after this incident took place. And
Right.
what was interesting is obviously she had no recollection of it, but she was able to pass to me in discussions, some of the recollections that were passed to her by her mother and her father about how very terrified everyone was during that period of time. Because what people don't understand is, while Rosewood was raised, and we're going to talk a little bit about how devastating that was and the legacy of that, at the same time, the big fear was that Black people within 150, 200-mile radius all were in peril, because there were so many angry whites who were just looking to hurt and kill whoever. So what wound up happening is my grandmother and those actually moved over to Duval County and what have you to prevent maybe being caught up in the maelstrom that was going on at that point in time. So with that, as I was telling you also, one day I had court maybe about 3 or 4 years ago in Levy County. And so I had heard about the Rosewood Massacre my whole life, just like you, even before it actually became an international cause célèbre in regards to trying to get reparations in the 90s. I had heard about it as a kid, but I had never had an opportunity to go there. And so after court one day, several years ago in Levy County, I got on my smartphone, Googled, found out the location of where the marker was. And, the thing that really tripped me out was that not just as I stood there and walked around the area, I noticed that there are a number of houses there on property that was owned by your ancestors. And yet none of the people who were either sitting or standing on their porches or in their yards or pulling out of the driveway, none of them were Black people. And so that just enraged me, the idea that not only could we be treated as a people that way, hunted down and killed, but at the same time, property that was owned, like you just say, a wonderful, beautiful area, homes. I believe there was an AME church there, a Masonic lodge, schools.
Right. Turpentine Steel,
Absolutely.
Masonic Lodge.
Absolutely. Our people were thriving, and yet none of that land belongs to us. Talk a little bit about how that makes you feel as a descendant of those who lived and thrived there before the massacre.
Well, of course, it upsets me very much so, because we all know that land equates to wealth. We owned Rosewood. There was a post office. There was a voting precinct. We had a train station and a train depot in 1920s. So it tells you how affluent we were. So I know that if we could have remained there, the sky is the limit of what we could have been or what we could have accomplished. At that time in the 1920s, cedar trees were what was the big capital, in the area. And they were sending the cedar trees to Cedar Key, where they would turn it into lead and ship them to New York City. That was in the 20s. So can you imagine how profitable our community would have been? Yes, there was a AME church. In fact, if you do the reading, there were 2 AME churches. One was erected in 1883, which was Pleasant Hill AME, and then the second was erected in 1886. So we had a Masonic lodge. We had so many things, and the idea that all of our land, this plush, green, wonderful area and land, is taken over by white people. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's the story of America, right?
It is. Yeah, absolutely. It is the story of America. And you're right. That area, for those who aren't from Florida, is called the Forgotten Coast. And some people call it the Nature Coast. They use those interchangeably. Yeah, we got a map right here heading down the Gulf Coast from Tallahassee on southwards toward Tampa. and it is beautiful countryside. There are so many times that, you know, when I have had to travel to Tampa, the easy way from Tallahassee is to take I-10 southward through 75. You can get
not me.
Quicker. Yeah, not you.
I
right.
go 1998.
I do too,
I go.
because we're twins on that. Because number one, it's the familial history of knowing that my people lived over in Dixon County. But secondly, it is picturesque, like you just said, the trees, the lakes, having the Gulf off to your right when you're coming down. It is indescribably beautiful. And yet at the same time, it does frustrate me beyond measure to know that we had that land that, again, could have derived wealth, just like you say, the turpentine industries, the cedar trees, and what have you, all gone now. And so it, you know, and then you see people sometimes questioning, like, well, why don't you all as a people get yourselves together? Why don't you pull yourselves up by the bootstrap? And then exhibit A and B is, well, let's take a look at Rosewood. And let's take a look at also when we had our stuff together, you all didn't like that and were trying to destroy it. Now, something that's interesting too is, as you were saying your names, the Evans, the Carriers, the doctors, and what have you, for those who might not have done the history lesson, so to speak, if you've ever watched John Singleton's fictional account, Rosewood, as you were talking, I'm sitting up imagining Don Cheadle and the late Florida Evans and everyone that was in that movie, Vin Raines, and those names are sounding off, and you realize, like, wow, you see them on the small screen or the big screen, but these were real people, and these were real people who actually suffered greatly that first week of January of 1923. And with that in mind, let me ask you this. You know, when I was in graduate school at FAMU, one of my primary professors was Dr. Larry Rivers, one of the great historians in the United States of America. Dr. Rivers did quite a bit of work with regards to trying to chronicle the events that took place in Rosewood, along with a number of other Black historians during that period of time. One of the things I remember him telling me when I had his classes in 94 and 95, so I was in graduate school when you were just starting off as a freshman, one of the things that was interesting that he talked about is that the actual death toll may never really be known. I know that the Florida legislature decided on, I believe, 8 died, 6 Black, whites, but it was his understanding that it could have numbered in the hundreds. Is that something similar to what you've heard passed down through the years from your family members?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, we have never known the number because our family members were so afraid. Once they left Rosewood, some of them changed their names. We have 2 of our great uncles, my Uncle Willie and my great grandmother's brothers, that we don't know what happened to them after they left Rosewood. So, you know, just the idea that only 6 people died, well, we're not so sure. We don't even know if they ever made it out. So, you know, it's really funny how these historians and these reporters want to come now and tell us our story when at first you didn't even want to acknowledge that it happened. For 7 days, my family was out there in the cold, in the swamp. If you do any research, you will find out that the winter of 1923 was one of the coldest Januaries. And January the 1st, when they began to run out there in the swamps, they were in their night clothes. They didn't even have shoes or socks or jackets. And just to imagine no one coming to help them. A lot of the survivors at the time, they were 2, 3, 9, 13. Can you imagine being in the swamp, running for your life, trying to be quiet, seeing these white insurrectionists? If you need to see the picture, you can go and look what's going on January the 6th. Amen. Those same type of people with that same attitude coming to decimate the entire Rosewood community. They burned down the churches. They shot the dogs. They burned down the dogs. They killed the livestock. They shot and killed everything they could find. And, you know, it always takes me back to a place that one of our themes was, we've come this far by faith. And I know, looking back on it and everything that my ancestors has taught me, that if it had not been for God on our sides, we would not have made it out. There was no army that was coming to save us. There were no Capitol Police that could stop a riot. It was just whenever the white people got tired, whenever they got tired of burning things down and killing people. So I am so grateful for, my knowledge and my understanding of family and my understanding of how history is written. And it's not always about, you got it, Grandma. It's not always about what the history books say, because the bottom line is all about what God says.
Amen. That is the bottom line. And I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we have a very special viewer watching today, our Bishop AJ Richardson. And good morning, sir, to you. And
Morning,
as we continue on with the discussion, as you talk about history, I am an historian, and my undergraduate and graduate school major. I majored in history in both undergraduate as well as graduate school, and sometimes I think to myself, I just might go back and get a PhD in history as well. And one of the things that's fascinating to me, though, Ebony, is that when I look back on my youth, before my family moved to Tallahassee, my dad was in the military. And so most of the schools that I attended were integrated schools. But once we got to Tallahassee, after spending a year at Oak Ridge Elementary School, I was able to attend my mother's alma mater, FAMU High School, which is a K through 12 school. They call it Developmental Research School now, but it's K through 12. So in fourth grade, I was over there. And it's amazing in terms of how history was taught by Black people at an all Black school, as opposed to the history that I was getting in first and second grade and third grade at integrated schools. And what's interesting about it is, every now and again, particularly on social media, you will hear people making derisive comments like, why do we still have a Black History Month? Right. As if it's something that we wanted to do. We all know that Negro History Week later morphed into Black History Month because our stories were not being told in the history books. And so again, whereas when I say I knew about Rosewood because my mother and father talked about it. And then my teachers at FAMU High School talked about it liberally. Whereas I realized that most of my friends, even my Black friends who did not attend such schools or did not have parents who were as aware, because again, I think to a great extent, it depends on how real your parents might have been in regards to telling you about the nature of racism and Jim Crow. And so with that in mind, what was it like in your schools growing up? Was your education on Rosewood and Tulsa and similar massacres relegated to what was passed down orally by your family? Or did you have teachers that actually were highlighting these instances in American history?
The history that I learned about these atrocities definitely came from my family in the AME Church. I attended Pasco High School, and Pasco County is predominantly Republican and predominantly white. So that would tell you right there. And yeah, we weren't taught anything about Rosewood or anything about Black history. In fact, I probably can say they probably didn't start mentioning much about Dr. Martin Luther King until maybe middle school or high school. And it was just kind of in passing. It had no substance to it. So I was very grateful because I was in the local YPD. So I was raised going to the Black History weekends. I was raised going, being in the Black Poetry contest. I was a Lily White. So I understood. I was always taught Black history. My name is Ebony. My name means Black. Most people see me and be like, can you give me your real name? And when I was born, my mom says their living room was black, red, and green. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. So it's like I've always had a very strong sense of who I was, but my younger years, formal education, those things weren't poured into me. Like I said, my history and everything that I learned pretty much was from my family and through the AME Church.
In your opinion, how best should these atrocities be taught to the generation that's coming up? I'm a father of an 11-year-old daughter, and I have been candid and raw with her as early as I can remember, just like my father and my mother were with me. They never held back in talking about America and systemic racism and white supremacy. How do you think these issues should be handled, as from our generation and the generation coming up behind us to the younger ones who are now in kindergarten, elementary school, and what have you? How should we go about teaching these instances?
Well, I definitely think it should be introduced. We may not have to speak so candidly about the massacre when it comes to the vividness, but just like how we're starting to teach the lesson about the indigenous Indians now, we have to realize that, you know, we have to be we have to share our own truth. That's what I'm stating. We have to share our own truth. And if we don't share it with the youth, then the history will die. Um, I'm reminded, out of sight, out of mind, because that's primarily what people think. If they don't see it, or if it doesn't happen to them and they don't encounter it, they don't have those experiences, they can never know. So I definitely think that we should start teaching our children about the atrocities that all Blacks have encountered, because they need to know how resilient of a people we were. I tell my kids that all the time. We are from Rosewood. We're so proud. I mean, we made it out with God, and we had an angry mob after us, white people. I mean, what type of strength and fortitude does it take to be out in the wilderness 7 days and still have hope and still find joy? So I think we should start teaching these values and these stories to our children. I am the mother of 7 biological children and 4 bonus children. So I teach my children as early as I possibly know what's right, what's wrong, where white people stand in America, where we stand in America. I want my children to be proud. And that's the only way that our children will have this sense of pride in their hearts about their culture and where they're from, is if we share the stories with them.
Amen. And with that, Ebony, let me ask you this. We started at the top of the hour discussing a little bit about how reparations has become in vogue here in America, particularly in the last decade or so. It's always been in the background during the majority of my life, but in the last 10 years or so, we have seen more instances than not that it has become a part of the narrative. I remember back when Hillary Clinton ran for president in 2016, it was not that big of an issue. But this past year, when Joe Biden was running for president, you started to see reparations become a major issue. The Rosewood survivors were provided some measure of compensation by the state of Florida. Many of us felt as if it was not enough, that it was a paltry sum, especially when you consider the fact that property values, some of the property, particularly on that coast, could be worth potentially millions of dollars right now, had those families, had your family and other families been able to maintain your property rights. So with that in mind, what are your personal thoughts on reparations? Is that something that the United States, the federal government, and or the state of Florida should be considering, not just for slavery, but for all that was lost by so many Black people during Jim Crow?
I definitely think so. I mean, reparations are definitely warranted. I mean, if you think about over 400 years of slavery, not even to think about the free labor, all the different places that we've built, the White House, the Capitol, all of this free labor, and then to think of all the land that we've owned, that they've just came and just burned down or decimated. I definitely think that reparations are warranted. The reparations, which they weren't even using that term at the time, from the Rosewood bill, no, it wasn't enough. No, it didn't go farther enough. The settlement ended up with 2.1 million, I think, and we asked for 7 at the time, which was still nothing. But definitely reparations are definitely warranted. I definitely agree with that.
Absolutely. And Ebony, how does it make you feel when you have a chance to travel back to Rosewood? I talked a little bit about how I felt personally the first time, or the only time I've had a chance to visit that city. But how does it make you feel as a direct descendant when you're in the area, or when you're driving around or walking around? Can you describe for our viewers those emotions that you feel?
Well, the first time that I actually went to Rosewood, I went during the Rosewood Family Reunion, and we took a field trip there. We were able to go in John Wright's house, which was the white man that hid some of our family members that ran the general store. Mm-hmm. His house is beautiful. It was erected, still standing. So that already kind of made me, I guess, kind of like, okay, so you burned everything else down, but you left this nice two-story home here. Um, I was very grateful that his family let us come in and let us see. Um, but I was very, it did anger me. It did anger me that the thought of all this land and all this property belonged to us. And then to see it inhabited by, at that time, really, it was no one there. Then the next time I actually visited there is when they placed that marker up in Rosewood. In fact, the Marching 100, some of them came. Jeb Bush was the governor at the time, if I'm not mistaken. And we had a ceremony. They uncovered the marker, and it actually made me feel proud. So I've had different emotions going there. But then when you think about it, when you talk to different people, we find out that the marker has been replaced so many times because it's been vandalized. So just the idea that a marker standing in Rosewood that depicts who we were, the whites still are so envious and so angry that they would deface the marker and it would have to be replaced. So I have mixed emotions when I've been to Rosewood. I haven't been probably in the last 10 years. It's something that our family has been talking about, and we're trying to plan a trip and do that.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you this too. I know we're coming close to the end, but speaking of reparations and speaking of feelings when you're there, you know, one of the things that has also burst forth in the last year is the phrase cancel culture. And it's been used a lot by people on the right who tend to get frustrated when those of us who are Black or come from other demographic groups that have been denigrated here in the United States of America, when we raise our history, when we talk about Rosewood, when we talk about Tulsa, when we talk about Jim Crow and enslavement, there are some on the right who feel as if that's an attack on them and their ancestry, when in reality it's just placing the full story into context. It's as if they want us to forget about what happened to us. But on the same token, these same ones will tell you, remember the Alamo, remember Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Never forget the Holocaust. And we shouldn't forget those instances either, but we shouldn't forget ours either. So with that in mind, what are your thoughts when we're starting to see across America where Confederate flags are coming down? We're starting to see where monuments that were built during the civil rights movement to terrorize Blacks by putting up statues and pictures of former Confederate leaders, specifically, again, to thumb noses at the Black push for civil rights. How do you feel about that? Do you think that is the right thing for us to kind of relegate those things from the Civil War, the Confederacy, and Jim Crow to museums where they should be studied, as opposed to courthouse steps where they receive honor?
Of course, I feel like everything has a place. And if we want to make everyone in America feel as though we're welcomed here, those things from the terrible past, from our perspective, they shouldn't be in anywhere that we have to walk in and feel comfortable. Yes, they should be in museums, possibly, yes. But definitely these statues need to come down. I think that's the first step in the right direction. They always say in order to get over something, the first step is to admit that there's a problem. So I think, to me, that they're finally saying that, you know, there is a problem. So I am grateful that we're actually making steps toward progress.
I'm on the same page with you. And again, as a historian, I actually believe that there is a place to study the Confederacy and Jim Crow. And I believe that's books, and I believe it's in museums. I think that, again, one of the things that bothered me is I had a case that I handled over in Dixie County, which is where one part of my family was from, as I just described, very near to Rosewood. And the first time I had a case there at the Dixie County Courthouse, as you're going up the stairs, there it is, big old monument with the Confederate battle flag right there on full display, with the lest we forget and discussing those glorious dead who passed away defending the Confederacy. And again, knowing that barely 40 miles away from the Dixie County Courthouse was where your ancestors were terrorized and murdered and beaten in 1923. Again, it just lets you know that there's a serious disconnect throughout the South with regards to their history as opposed to our history, and how it's important for us to weave the two together so that a full account can be given for those descendants of ours 100 years from now to understand what all was really going on here in the United States of America. Let me ask you this too. I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about your work within the AME Church. I know that when you were introducing yourself earlier, I was like, well, she's the busiest young lady I know. And when you tell me that you're also a mom and what have you too, just talk to us a little bit, our viewers, about some of the things that you're doing there in your community through your church.
Some of the things that we're doing right now through the community and through our church is on Wednesday. We have started pretty much since the pandemic. We do a 12 noon prayer and we reach out. My mom and we reach out. She's an exhorter in the AME Church, Sister Williams. We reach out to mostly the elderly members to ensure how they're doing, what's going on, and we connect every Wednesday. Other things that we're doing through the local YPD, we have a Souls for Soul ministry where we give out shoes to the needy. We also have a food bank. Currently, because we're not at the church, we really haven't been using the food bank that much. But the Lord laid it on me and my mom's heart that a few of us just got together, and on Christmas, we made 60 meals and donated them in the community, as well as on Thanksgiving. I think this pandemic has given us all a different avenue that we can take. Before this pandemic, I didn't even have social media. But since then, I've decided to get it, and it has been such a blessing. We've been able to actually connect with more people. I was very concerned this year being the YPD director. I had 4 of my seniors that were very in the active YPD department that graduated. And I was thinking like, Lord, what am I going to do? 4 of my strongest YPDers, they're gone. Lo and behold, the pandemic came and now everybody's gone. So we're all on social media. Mm-hmm. So I thank God that we're still able to work. We have right now, we took up collections for the Super Bowl of Caring. And what we're doing is we're making gift baskets for the elderly in our church. I think it's 10 of them. And we're also going to donate to a local community, local shelter that is in need of supplies in Brooksville. That's Hernando County. That's very near to us. So we try to stay busy and stay working. We also have a movie night for Black History coming up for the YPD. And we're going to do it via Zoom. We're going to be watching Hidden Figures, because we're always trying to educate our children. We want them to be proud of their culture. We want them to know, what great beings we are. So we're constantly trying to educate our children through the YPD department. And we're also always trying to give back. Intergenerational activities I find work the best because children are able to interact with older members, and they learn respect, they learn valuable lessons in life. So that's kind of what we've been doing.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, you raise another great point, which is COVID-19. This pandemic has impacted us in so many ways. Some of it obviously negative. Many of us have lost family members or friends who have passed away tragically from the disease, but it has also changed the way that we interact. Before we came on air, you and I and Kirtiana and editor John Thomas, we were talking a little bit about how this time last year, who would have thought that we'd have these virtual lives that we're doing, where we're able to actually project out to the entire world and highlight members of our denomination who are out here working hard in so many different fields of endeavor. With that in mind, do you see where even in the midst of this pandemic and the sadness and despair of it, do you see where there actually are within your sphere some benefits from it as well?
I definitely do, because honestly, we are able to connect with more people outside of the church now than we were before. Sometimes the church gets a bad rap. Everybody don't want to come to church. Not everybody. Some people don't want to come to church because they fear of being judged. They don't think they're living up to the standards. I don't really know what people's excuses are, but just walking into a church building sometimes is very intimidating to others. But now with the means of the virtual reality in your home, you can go to church anywhere you like. You can have prayer service. I mean, on an average Sunday, I may go to about 3 different denominations of churches. You couldn't do that before, so it's like there's no excuse that God isn't available and you can't find him, because it's like during this pandemic, this is a time for you to go into your homes and for you to take shelter and for you to study and commune with the Lord. So I am grateful, not grateful for the pandemic itself, but grateful for this time that, it's opened our eyes. We even did a virtual Rosewood Family Reunion this July 2020. It was something that we decided to do because for 35 years, we've always had a reunion. That's how the Rosewood story got out. That's how we were able to write the letters to the legislator. That's how the Rosewood bill was passed. And that's how so many of us were educated and are able to go to college. It was like, we have to do something. So we decided that we would have our Rosewood family reunion. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah,
But
that's nice.
we designed T-shirts, we made masks, and we still did it 3 days. We had our family night on Saturday. We still did our business meeting that we have every Saturday morning, and we were able to showcase talent of our family that otherwise probably we wouldn't have even known. So they were able to share with us if they had their own business or they had a dream or something that they were doing. And it was so remarkable by Sunday when we had our banquet and my sister was doing a slideshow talking about the graduates. We had family members typing in the chat box saying, hey, send me his information. I got a job for him. Hey, oh, he's in the music. So am I. It's like we're able to actually connect. And so I'm grateful of this time. It's pushing us all to be a little better, dig a little deeper, work a little harder. But in the spirit of being a Rosewood woman, that comes pretty easy.
No doubt about it. And that resilience that your family has shown through the decades, almost a century now, being able to continue to thrive and prosper in spite of what transpired the first week of January 1923. Again, it does push us all forward to continue to persevere even during this time. And, one of the things that I have been so impressed with is how our churches, much like our school system, our public school systems, have adapted. Like you said, online services here in Tallahassee. My home church, Bethel AME, is at the vanguard of the COVID-19 vaccinations. Almost every other week, there are individuals from the community who are able to come to the church and get inoculated. And, you realize that, the work of God is where you find it. And so I am so grateful for what all our church is doing and what you are doing specifically down there in Lacoochee, Florida, to continue with the legacy. With that in mind, last question. We are barely 2 years away, not even 2 years away from the 100th anniversary of the Rosewood massacre. What are some things that the public can be looking out for in regards to maybe some types of tributes, public commemorations of those events? Are y'all already planning that? If so, is there a way that the public can help you and your family in regards to making sure that the world never forgets what took place almost 100 years ago?
Well, definitely. We've actually started planning this year. We had our very first Remembrance Week for the 98th anniversary, and we did it via Zoom. Again, it was on January 1st. And we came up out of that service, we were able to come up with some very great ideas of what we can continue to do. Because for no longer are we going to sit just idly silent by. We're going to share our story with the world. So yes, we're planning on doing something for the 100th anniversary. We have not nailed it down to exactly what. We definitely know that it will involve a trip to Rosewood. We will definitely be in contact with the AME Church, and we will let you know what those needs are. But we will definitely be celebrating the 100th anniversary of Rosewood. And with that, I would really like to share, if I can, it's the Rosewood story.
Okay.
This was written by my grandmother, Altamise Rispers, who she's a missionary. She received the Pearl of Missions recipient in 2014. This poem was actually said on the steps by my sister on the Capitol once the legislature passed. So I'm going to share it with you now. It's the Rosewood story, written by Altamise Rispers. Yes, and she's sitting right beside me. In January 1, 1923, stood a village deep in the Swanee River swamps, our own Black community. There were churches, a school, a Black fraternal lodge hall, a sugar mill, turpentine still, and a store. A population of 150 or more. A shattering scream came like a dream. I'll call her Fanny Magaline. A white woman cried to a friend so loud, I know he's Black, and that's a fact. That one statement drew the crowd. Can you imagine how she said, "That black man took my money and fled"? Let me tell you instead how my family said it happened. Fanny's white lover is the one who fled, taking her money and slapping her side the head. Okay. Blood boiled, anger brewed when Fanny's story was told her way. Many lives had to pay. A bloody massacre meant, they say. Beatings, hangings, burnings, running until the seventh day. Sympathetic whites hit our families by night. Give up, they said. You can't win this fight. Soldiers guarded our families as the train pulled in, bearing the burden of Fanny's unforgotten sin. 7 days left a vanished town, history buried all around. For 64 years, Rosewood was kept a secret. No one talked, black nor white. Neither wanted to restart that fight. But since July 1985, our families meet yearly to show love and unity dearly. With God on our side and a great sense of pride, we have met in Washington, D.C. in 1993. Then we stood in 94 in the presence of Florida's great legislators and more. Yes, we stand strong, proud, and free, for we are the Rosewood family.
Well, that's all right now. And I'll say this much, Ms. Rispers, I want you to know that somewhere in heaven, the great Langston Hughes and Claude McKay and all of those other great Renaissance figures could not have written that any better. Can you go ahead and let them come on into the mic? I mean, into the picture frame so that our viewers can see those queens. All right, who do we have with you? I know we've got Miss Althemise Rispers, and who is the other young lady that's to the right?
The other young lady is my mother.
How you doing?
Her name is Exhorta Evelyn Williams. And right here you have 3 generations of Rosewood and 3 generations of AMEs.
Amen. Amen and amen again. Well, it's wonderful to meet you, ladies. And again, I have been inspired by today's conversation. Ebony, I tell you this much. Again, I know that other viewers of ours have been similarly inspired, and whatever it is that I can do and that this format can do to help you as we move forward to the 100th anniversary of Rosewood, we are here for you. And I look forward to being front and center when you all have your celebration in January 2023, God willing, and the creek don't rise. How about that?
I know that's right. Yes.
All right. With that, you be blessed. All of you be blessed. And I look forward to speaking with and fellowshipping with you again in the future. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. And we want to thank our viewers as well. Now, our next TCR dialogue will be on Tuesday with the president of Wilberforce University, Dr. Alfred Pinkard, and Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio. That's next Tuesday. President of Wilberforce, Dr. Alfred Pinkard, and Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio will be featured on our program. You can support the Christian Recorder by buying a subscription for $36 a year. Visit www.thechristianrecorder.com. Again, support the Christian Recorder by buying a subscription, $36 a year, by visiting www.thechristianrecorder.com. Support the AME Church Publishing House for your church, school, and worship needs. Visit www.amecpublishing.com. Again, that's www.amecpublishing.com. The Lenten devotional published by the Christian Education Department is available at ameced.com. Again, the Lenten devotional published by the Christian Education Department is available at ameced.com. Our sponsors today are Foster for Bishop 2021 and Eldridge for Treasurer 2021. And again, we want to give all the praise to our Bishop, A.J. Richardson, as well. And we thank each of you for spending a little time with us this morning, learning about this very important moment in Black history. With that, God bless, Godspeed. We look forward to seeing you at the next TCR Dialogues. Thank you very much.